Let's see. I think this will work. Okay, so in Firefox, I have this nice little tool called REST Client. It's a plugin. And what it allows me to do is perform REST calls to an endpoint right inside of Firefox. And the reason you want this is because, again, if I'm using a browser, I can issue a GET, and I'd have to write a form to do a post. And yeah, how am I going to do a delete and a put and all these other options? Why am I going to write a ton of code? Forget that. I've got a REST client right here that can let me emulate all of that. So I have an API. Ignore this for now. We're going to come to that conversation later in the presentation. But I didn't want to separate them out into two different code bases. Yes, sir?
Is this something that's an add-on that's downloadable?
Yes, correct. Let me see. Where am I menu? Oh, the menu's over here. Hang on a second. It's called REST Client is the name of the plugin for Firefox. There's another one too. Of course, I already uninstalled it. I didn't like it. So this is the one I ended up using. And there's a few little quirks in here. So I also have, I'll show them to you, and I can share them with you if you guys want also. You can also do this via curl. But curl, you can't just as easily come down here and copy or paste in your XML, response or your request. With curl, you gotta, it's a little bit more cumbersome. But what will happen is when you're getting like a C other, like when a resource gets created, you want to redirect you want to issue a 301C other, or excuse me, 303C other that says, hey, I was created, and here's where you're at. So if I posted data to a customer resource, and it created a new customer with the ID of 13, I would send back a 303C other, myapi.com/customer13. But what happens is, because this is built into the browser, it follows it. And what you get is a 200 OK, and you get the get of customer 13. Well, it tells me that the customer is created because it gave me the resource, but when I was developing my own REST API and I needed to test every single function and capability of my API, I didn't need my client following it. I needed to see the actual data coming back. So I had to use curl. Curl will also follow, but before it follows it, it's at least kind enough to show you the original result that came back, and then it'll follow it and give you the next result. So I couldn't find a single REST client or any other client that you could do REST in that wouldn't follow it as if it was a consuming client versus just giving you the raw return back from the server. It always wanted to follow the commands, which is good. You just got to be aware of it. So in here, when we create something new, you're going to go, wait a second, shouldn't I have gotten a C other and a redirect? You did. It was behind the scenes. This client just did it for you automatically. All right. So I have this API. And right now, because I'm in development mode, I'm just echoing out to the screen. Obviously, my errors will be prettier, and you'll see prettier errors in a moment. By default, I have it set to always give you back JSON data. So when I built my API, I have it defaulted to JSON automatically, but I also support XML and JSON-P, which is like the ability to cross-domain JSON data on an API. And we'll talk about more of that as well. And if I forget to, because it's like in a half slide, speak up if you have a question about it, but I want to talk about it here. So right now I have, when I go to my countries resource, I literally have no countries in my database. We're about to create some. So there's an error, because I was expecting some data, none was provided. My API is saying I have nothing to give back. So if I go back here and look, I'm issuing a GET to that URL, or that URI endpoint. I'm getting back an internal server error as my header. And if I look at my response body, again, that's not how I normally would send back an error, and I'll show you better ones. But the important part here is that I got my response header correctly, which was there was an internal server error. There was no data to serialize and hand back to you. All right, so let's, that's not it. Hang on a second. Okay, here we go. All right, so I am going to create a country. let's do a post to, okay, so remember, countries is our collection of country resources. So to create a country, I need to go to the country resource. So I'm going to go to the country resource. Look at all these things you can do. Get, post, put, delete, we already talked about. We're going to talk about head, options, and trace in a moment. Then you can do all these other ones. These are part of the web DAV, how you want to pronounce it, server extension. They're not part of the official specification, like the HTTP specification. A lot of servers support them, but there's a pretty decent amount of servers that do not support them. So I'd be very, very careful about using anything that's not standard. A couple of reasons for that, besides the obvious. REST, while it has been around for a very long time, architecturally and conceptually, actual REST implementations are a fairly new development in the internet world. Netflix is probably one of the best REST APIs that exist to go look at for demos. Flickr has one. Google has one. Dig used to have one. There's a couple other big companies that have one. I have some bookmarked. Netflix, even in the, what I would say, the best implementation, Netflix doesn't, it still doesn't do everything correct, quote unquote. And I have a slide on this later, but one of the things to remember is that REST is a specification, not a standard. So it's a little wild, wild west when you get into some of the corners that aren't the standard. Everybody gets the concept of get, put, post, delete. But what happens when I want to move a resource somewhere? What happens when I want to merge a resource? What happens when I want to copy it? What does that mean to you? What does that mean to me? What does that mean to your application? Etc. So WebDAV, they've come up with their implementation of what it does and what it means. Not all servers support it. So you certainly want to be careful about using something that you don't know, who's going to be consuming it or where your application is going to be deployed. If you have ultimate control, then hey, go with it. But it's the same thing as everything. If you don't know what browser you're going to be consuming your application, you got to go with the lowest common denominator. If you're in a controlled environment, knock yourself out and use IE6. More power to you. So again, just be careful with some of these down here. So we can do all these. So we're going to post data to our country URI, which is a resource. I am going to, sorry, I'm trying to go up and I'm going to go sideways. I am going to add a request header. I'm going to set my content type to application XML. So what this is saying is I'm about to make a request, and the content type of my request payload is XML. And the correct MIME type for that is application/XML. Then I am going to put in my payload. Now, because I'm setting XML, now I could just easily send JSON, but XML, I already had the example written. But it's easy enough to convert. It'll accept either. So I've got I have my request. I've got my country. I've got my name, my region code, my calling prefix, and my calling code. So I'm going to create a country resource with these parameters or these properties. Now, how did I know to do this? Well, hopefully, as an API developer who cares about the programmers consuming the API, I've written some wonderful documentation outlining sample requests, all the parameters of the resources, and how you get to them, and what kind of response you should expect. For this demo, do I have such documentation written? Of course not. In the real world, would I? Probably 3.5 years after it was launched. But in theory, that's where you'd go and get this information. So I actually have, when I set it up, and you'll see this later in the code, I have developer.test and I have API.test. And one spot's where you go and get your documentation, you request your API key and all that fun stuff. And then the other URI is where you actually go to consume the actual API. All right, so we're going to send this request as application XML to this resource. We're going to post the data, and because I know how my API works, the post is going to create. And I say that because with a put, it says that you're going to update an existing resource or create one if it doesn't exist. Remember, REST is a specification, not a standard. Put doesn't work the same way on every API. Most of the time, you're going to find that a put will update an existing resource, but it doesn't always create a new one. Sometimes put only creates a new one, and they use patch to perform an update. And that's a whole other interesting conversation. So read the documentation, and if they don't have documentation, reach out via email, phone, Skype, some way, and slot the developer. Because trying to consume an API in the blind, especially when you're not sure what one of these actions is going to do, is not going to make you a happy developer. All right, we're going to send this data. 201 created. That is the correct message response I would expect to get back. Or status code, excuse me. And I got back, let me make this bigger. There it is. And that's as big as it's going to get. Okay, let me scroll. All right, so I got back a content location header right here. That tells me that if I go to that URI, I'm going to be able to access the resource I just created. I also send back a location header, which is a 303C other. And it's actually going to be a URI. So both of these should be sent, and both are correct in being there. Because depending on the consuming application, it might just want to know the location of the content because it's saving it, it's emailing it, you don't know what they're doing with it. Or they might want to actually follow valid headers that come back, and they'll follow the redirect and take the user there. You don't know what the client is going to do, so you send both. And according to the specification, HTTP 1 spec 1.1, it is valid to put both of those headers in your response. They are designed to exist side by side. So be a good citizen and send both of them. If anybody ever asks, oh, one's good enough, you don't need, no, send both, because you don't know what the consuming code is doing. And it's not our job to tell the consuming code what to do. We merely direct. All right, and you'll notice that I sent back my response in JSON. And so if I look at my response body, there is my JSON response. And again, the reason it came back in JSON is because that's how my API is set up. By default, it sends back everything in JSON unless you specify otherwise. All right, any questions about that so far? Okay. So, now I can go back to my get. I'm going to delete this. I can leave it there because it's just going to be ignored because I'm doing a get. So it's just going to see this extra request body and go, whatever, I'm not programmed to look at it, because on a get, all I do is take an identifier and go look up the information. I'm not going to read the request body and respond to it. I ignore it. So I'll literally leave it here for you, but you're just wasting bandwidth. There's absolutely no sense in sending it. I'm going to come back here, I'm going to follow this URI right here. I could just easily click it, but I am going to go here, go to country 1, I've got my get, and I'm going to hit send. And my response body is in JSON, because again, that's what I'm getting. And so you'll see I have a response code of 200. We'll talk about the vary header a little bit later. I've got a country ID of 1. The name is United States of America. Region code is US. Calling prefix is 011. Calling code is 1. All of that information that we just used to create this resource. I also have a resource link. Here's its href and the relationship. It's itself. Because remember, we're supposed to send back alternate or alternative representations in the response. So if I could represent a country in multiple ways, I need to be able to have a way of identifying this is yourself, and this is how you can go and see related links. Maybe I've got countries, and then I can see related dictators, or I can see related citizens. Again, we don't know how the data is related to each other. So this tells it, I am myself, and then I can follow links, and that's how it knows it can always get back. If you're in a collection, you're going to have related links, you're going to have previous and next. So you see a lot of times, with HTML, they come out in HTML5, but HTML5 is kind of the umbrella that people are starting to use it. In a page, you're supposed to put meta tags and say, this is my relationship, I'm previous, I'm next, when you're paging through results, etc. It's that concept of being able to say, how can I be self-descriptive? If I started here, I should still be able to go up and down and sideways through the tree and the branch and still scrape the entire API and all the data it presents. There isn't a top-down hierarchy. even though that might be how you guide your users through it and how you think of it, you can start anywhere and go everywhere because they're self-descriptive messages.
So
All right.
is self, are you trying to say self is a reserved word?
Yes, it is. I mean, you can, again, it's a specification, not a standard. But if you hold true to the REST specification, and this concept isn't just a REST, so if you go read any of the REST books that are out there, and I've read all 7 of them, because there really are only 7, and I own, I think, 5 of them, and they all put you to sleep, except for the cookbook, but then you just get distracted. Atom publishing, when you're doing like an Atom feed, an RSS feed, one of the specifications in the Atom spec is the concept of self, related, next, previous. So the concept is, it transcends just, not just REST. And honestly, I can't even tell you who came up with it. I can't say, that Dr. Fielding came up with, hey, this is how you do it. It was more of a concept, and I think this might, again, don't hold me to it. I don't know that for sure. This might have just been the result of the concept being borne out in reality. But you'll see this a lot with RSS feeds, with Atom publishing and Atom feeds, like an HTML5, that concept. Semantic web. The idea to be able to say, I've got this, what are all the things about it, how do I have taxonomies, and how's it related to another object? A whole another conversation. So I can also ask for this. Let me show you real quick. So you saw, obviously, it came back in here. So I can delete this just to show you that it had nothing to do with it. Boom, there it is, nothing changed. I still got my response because, again, it ignores my request body. And and it doesn't need this either, so let me clear these. I need to copy this because it'll clear. Oh, so if you are using this plugin, just since we're looking at it, when you hit clear, it does. So if you want to clear your header, make sure you copied anything else out of here that you might have been working on, which is why I have a text pad open with all my stuff in it, because clear clears everything. So now I want to put that back. I want to show you that when I hit a send, boom, there it is, my response body. Again, my content type had nothing to do with it, because that was the type of my request, not my response. Now, if I wanted to see my response in a different format, I can add a different request header, and I can put a, that's not it, accept, and I'm going to put, let's see, application JSON. I do not have these memorized yet, even though you think I would. Application JSON, and OK. All right, so now I'm saying I want to accept the request in this format. Now when I send, I was already in it. I wanted XML. By default, it sends back JSON. This is what I want to show you. Now when I hit send, well, isn't that interesting? I might have broken something. Well, that's supposed to be XML.
Hold on, flash.
Huh. Hang on a second. I think I needed. No, it's supposed to be XML. It's text XML. That's right. You send. See, you send your data as as application XML, but you expect your result to be in text XML because you're sending data to be acted upon to your application, but you're expecting to read a plain text response. I didn't invent it. Don't ask me.
It's content type versus font type.
Yeah, exactly. I always screw myself up.
Text.
And you want text. See, you guys are awake. All right, now I hit send. Hey, there we go. All right, there you go. So it's the exact same resource, just represented in 2 different ways. All right, so we did get and post. Let's do a put. So this isn't going to be pretty because I'm pulling it out of my curl example. And again, I did it with XML because XML is a heck of a lot easier to see in my curl than it was the JSON because I got tired of counting how many open curly braces I had. So I just went to XML because it spaced it out a little bit better. But again, you can use any of them. I am going to send, okay, so I want this to be application XML. I want this to be content type, if I can type. All right, and I am going to, all right, what do we want to say? Okay, so I'm going to say, for my resource country identified by 1, I have United Group of States. So remember, it was United States of America before. I'm going to change its name to the United Group of States. And we can change, we can change any of this stuff. It doesn't matter. As long as you're following the business rules of your application. Now, my application only accepts a 2-character region code. How do I know? Because it's, I read the non-existing documentation. If I send in something it couldn't accept, I'm going to get back a not supported or an error. I'm going to, it responds correctly. So I don't want you to think that, oh, okay, well, this is just a very trite, consolidated example. There's a full-fledged, code base behind it. We're going to look at that code base, and then if we want to come back to this and try to pound on it, see what happens, by all means we can. I'm just trying to keep it simple. All right, so I'm going to do a put of this data. I hit send. Here's my response header. I got a 200 OK because it's telling me, hey, it was OK. That's the valid response to a put. Because I didn't create anything, I changed something. And I already know how to get to the resource I already had, so I don't need a redirect or a content location header. So now if I come back here and say, okay, well now I want to see a get of it, and I hit send, you'll notice that there's my name. And there's, did I not do my region code? Oh, I might have lied. I might not actually be updating region code in my backend. Obviously I'm reacting to name. I'll have to look at the code. I think I only looked at the one parameter, not the rest of it. But regardless, it would have changed had I, been a good developer and wrote the rest of my demo. Okay, so that was a put. And then let me go ahead and let's add another one real quick. I want to get 2 of them here for you so you can see. I'm going to post one more so we can get more than one of these. I'm going to put it here, paste it. Okay, so let me go here real quick. So in the browser, I also have a plugin for Firefox that it's a JSON viewer. So it will actually recognize a JSON payload, and it will present it to me like this. So I don't have to view source and then lose my mind trying to figure out what my data looks like. So it's another great, wonderful plugin.
Is that called?
Does anybody know what's off their head? If not, I'll look here. It's called. That's the wrong file. I want add-ons. It is called JSON View. While we're in here, Firebug, if you don't know, you absolutely need to have that plugin. FirePHP is awesome. It's a plugin for the Firebug plugin. In my Zen Framework application, I have a logger set up, and whenever I'm in my development environment, whenever an error occurs, it sends me FirePHP headers that show up in my Firebug console. So when I'm dealing with AJAX requests, which are notoriously hard to debug because it's consuming code in the browser to a backend, and you don't necessarily have anything show up on the screen, like you're not going to see PHP errors just show up and says, oh, well, line 17 is missing, a triple colon, or whatever that 29 long Hebrew error is. You can set them to yourself through headers, which is fantastic because that way your environment won't get screwed up with data that it wasn't expecting. Because if your consuming AJAX code is expecting JSON and you're sending it back a var dump, it's going to all blow up. And not only are you not going to be able to read the var dump very well, you're not going to quite know what's wrong with your application either, because now you're sending in data it wasn't expecting, and blah, 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 blah. So FirePHP is a phenomenal one also. JSON View, the REST client, that's what it's called, REST client. Web development toolbar, that's pretty much it. And they probably have equivalent ones in Chrome. I just spend a lot of my time in Firefox. Okay, so this is, remember, countries is a collection of country resources. Here's my country. ID of 1, United Group of States, because remember we changed the information a moment ago in the demo. Et cetera, et cetera. Here's all this kind of stuff. So, now I'm going to go back here real quick, and I'm going to create a few more of these with a post. I'm going to hit send, I'm going to hit send, I'm going to come back here, and I'm going to refresh, wrong button, and look at that. We are still a resource of countries that represent individual country resources. Here's a country, here's a country, here's a country. Of course, the data is the same because I just kept posting the same data. But this is a JSON representation of a collection of country resources when I go to the countries collection. This works the same way no matter what your data is. You have collections and you have individual resources.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
Back on your view on your client. sorry.
Oh, no problem. Here.
Yeah.
Okay.
Your URI there is country/1. Is that one relevant then if we're creating?
No, actually it's not, because that's a thank you, very good question. So I screwed up and actually passed in an ID here, but because I didn't screw up when I built my API, I look at the country resource. I have a country controller in my Zen Framework application. That country controller looks at the method that was sent. I say, oh, I'm a post, and I know to look at the request body and react to it. I don't pull any of the parameters at that point off of the URI. So my API code is actually ignoring that parameter. So you're right, I should not have sent it, but because my API isn't designed to react to it, as it shouldn't be, no harm, no foul. Other than, yes, I shouldn't have had it there. Yes?
How are you authenticating every request?
In here I am not. So, authentication. All right. Let's talk server to server. You got a backend server to some other backend server. You can absolutely use OAuth for authentication. You could use signed certificates for authentication over SSL. You absolutely should be doing it that way. There's no reason not to. All right. So how our app was intended to be used was in that scenario, as well as we were going to have a website that was also consuming this application. Well, you can't do OAuth in a website. Twitter tried that on the iPad app, and look how that turned out. They exposed their OAuth key to everybody. You can't do OAuth in a public, private scenario, because I can't have a private key in a publicly viewable source code of a browser. So, how can I do it? The way we're doing it is all of our requests are over SSL. So that means even if I'm sending plain text passwords, it's still being encrypted with SSL. So we're using basic auth headers for our website. Not happy about it, but it's the best we can do, because the consumers of our website are varied participants anywhere in the world. We can't guarantee they're working on this specific browser. We can't guarantee that they're going to have permission to install a Java applet that we can sign certificates with, or any of those things that we want to do. If we were distributing it to users that we had a feel for the environment, they weren't just general web users, then we could do signed certificates or some sort of applet or an ActiveX controller. We could have more control. We would try to lock it down more. But since we're kind of open, we do basic auth over SSL. Now, basic auth says send a username, password in plain text. Again, we're SSL, so we're encrypted. We don't have to worry about that. Because it's SSL, proxies aren't going to be caching it. All that security is already taken care of for you. Well, our website, the website is a consuming application. It needs to authenticate itself against the API, saying, do I, as a client, have access to your API? I need to send an API key and probably a password. But I also, when that request comes in, a user's logged into the website. We need for that user to have a unique experience based on their data. So I need to authenticate two different levels of users. I need to authenticate the application against my API, and then I also need the user credentials so I can use that to authenticate against my business logic and my actual application. So what we are doing is I'm taking the API key, and which you can see, I mean, it's just there, but it's two-pronged. If you pass in just the API key and password, my API says, congratulations, you're authenticated. When you try to do anything else, it says, I'm sorry, you didn't provide valid user credentials for the resources you're trying to access. And that's how we got around it. So I send the API key and a pipe symbol and the user's username, the application's password, a pipe symbol, and the user's password together. That becomes my name value basic auth header that it's expecting when it comes across. So that way HTTP is fine and everybody's fine and happy. It can all be torn apart. And then I authenticate the application separate than I authenticate access to the actual resources. I'd rather we go server to server, OAuth be done. But we're in a mixed use mode, so it's kind of best of what we can make of it. And if anybody has, if anybody's doing something different or solve some of these problems, by all means, speak up or we'll talk afterwards. But when you have the same application simultaneously capable of being consumed from the back-end server and the front-end client, you very quickly run into a lowest common denominator, and that denominator is really low on a front-end browser.
Can you use the REST to make an API key?
Yeah, you could. I mean, you want to make sure that you have the correct levels of authentication. Like I have a developer myapi.com, and I've got I've got API. Well, actually, it's API.test on local, but that's from API. I have a developer dot. You can go there, read the documentation, sign up for an API key. But I would want to still be in control of issuing that API key because I want to make sure that the information. It depends. If it's public and you just need something for Flickr because you want to access blah blah blah, maybe I don't care, and here is one. If you're a potential vendor of mine or a client of mine, I'm going to pick up the phone, call you. Hey, are you really there? Is that really who you are? That kind of thing. I need you to sign a license agreement. I mean, I don't know. Then I'll give you an API key. So you certainly could use the API to create its own API keys, but you definitely do that in an environment where it's very open and you don't necessarily care who has access to your data. Otherwise, I mean, you might as well just leave your door unlocked because it's the same difference. So yes, it's technically possible, but it just comes down to business needs like everything else. All right, so the last thing we can do here is we can delete one of these. So let me grab my delete. Actually, I don't even need to do that. Let's delete the second one. And I'm going to send it a delete.
Can I have a question?
Yes?
On the previous, you entered all the calling codes as 1, so there's not a 2, is there?
These are the IDs that are created. So
your calling code means nothing.
correct. So the concept behind this is in my business logic. I have an entity. I use Doctrine, and so I have an entity class that represents my country, and so I have a calling code and a calling prefix. So if I'm dialing out of the country, this is the calling code. So that it just happens to be that the U.S. is a 1, and it happens to match our IDs. Perhaps I should have used a better example. But correct. So that has absolutely nothing to do with it. The IDs that I'm referencing in the URI are the actual unique identifiers that are being returned. In this case, the business application is simply just doing an auto-increment primary key on the database. It could be a text string. It doesn't matter. It's whatever your identifier is. It doesn't have to be a number. It doesn't have to be called ID. Just trying to stick with stuff we know, and I'm lazy. ID's a heck of a lot easier to type than GUID or anything else. All right, so I'm going to delete this second country resource because I'm referencing it by its ID. Again, none of this here matters. Because I'm sending a delete, it's just immediately going to delete. It's not going to look at what you sent because it doesn't care. I'm going to send my data. I don't get any response back because I'm not expecting to get a response back as far as the response body goes, but I am expecting to get back some headers which says, hey, 204 no content. That now tells me that at that URI, country 2, there is no longer any content. A 204 no content is a successful delete. If I come back here and refresh, country 2 is now gone.
So we could say that a request body should be ignored except on what, like put and post, right?
Put and post. And if you're doing some other things, like maybe some other ones, like a copy, or if you're implementing kind of your roll your own. But as far as we've talked about tonight, put and post are the only 2 times that request body will get looked at. Yeah. All the other times, if you send anything, it'll be ignored. It's wasted data. Don't even bother. 1, it makes no sense, and B, if you wrote your REST API correctly, it's going to be ignored anyway.
Right.
So, why did you make it a 204 instead of a 200? To me, 200 means successful. I did what you asked me to do.
What action were you performing?
Well, I was doing a delete, but
Correct.
204 makes it look like, I couldn't delete it because I couldn't find it.
Well, that's
It
correct.
looks like an error.
Because you were saying, I want to issue a delete. I want to perform a delete action on this resource. Once that delete action was performed, it was telling you that I successfully can no longer find content for this resource. Because a 204 no content means it can't be found, which means it was successfully deleted. If it came back with a 200 okay, that means you got a problem because not only did it not erase or delete as a get, it means it didn't ever actually delete either because it shouldn't be getting you back anything successfully. It should be telling you no content was found. Now, we're not saying that, we're not giving you a 404 not found because the concept of a country is still valid. We're saying that there was no data found for this ID. Now, if I came up here and I typed in, countries gobbledygook, then I would expect to get a 404 not found because that resource doesn't exist as a concept. But if I'm looking at a specific one, I would expect to get back a 204 no content.
If you do the same delete now, you'll get,
I should get the same.
404.
No, I should still get the same.
You get a
Yeah, you'll get the same. So one of the concepts in REST is called I always say this wrong. Does anybody know the word impotency? Is that right? Ish, I think. What that means is you should be able to perform the exact same action over and over and over, and expect the same result. So if I delete a resource, I should expect for it to tell me it's deleted. Doesn't matter whether it was there or not there to be deleted. My intention was to delete that resource, therefore it's now gone. Now, if you wanted to actually know whether it existed first, and then whether or not this content was a result of it not previously being there, or as a result of the action, you can do a couple different things. You can either create a workflow in your REST API where you would post data to a resource that would then say, oh, I'm going to perform the following actions, and I'm going to return to you different responses to give you kind of a workflow concept. Or in your consuming application, you would first get a resource, and if it doesn't exist, then don't send the delete, or you know that when I send the delete, it was a response. Again, with impotence, we've got the URL. Okay, I'm going to go to mysite.com, action equals, or that's not even right. Name equals this, and this equals that, and Q equals 3. Let's say that gets cached in a proxy server. When I go to request that URI again, the proxy says, oh, you know what? I don't have a cache of that. I'm going to go out and execute it again. Or I do have a cache of that. I'm going to hand it back to you. What could you reasonably expect the action to be? That type of URI format, in the way the web works today, could just as easily be a GET with some search parameters or criteria. It could be the posting of an item to a shopping cart. It could be the checkout. It could be charging your credit card again. It could be posting another invoice. It could be deleting records. There's no way of knowing. 99% of all URIs on the web today are all GETs that emulate all this behavior. They're not recreatable without consequence. They're not impotent. And I should have put that on that slide. I have it later. That's another one of those core concepts of REST is impotence. Impotence. How do you never say it right?
Idempotent.
Yeah, maybe that's it. I can never say it right. You had a question for a while? Oh, okay. Yes.
Could you post that again and again?
I'm sorry. Yes, you can keep posting. Now, if you keep posting, you're going to keep creating, which is the action you expect. Because when you post, you're not expecting to get the same result back. You're not expecting to get the same resource back. You're expecting the same action to occur. If I keep posting, I expect to get back a, now I'm getting my headers confused, whatever the created one was.
201.
Thank you, 201 created, sorry. Because if you keep, again, same action, same results. You should have that expectation in REST.
Back to authentication.
Yes.
Are you putting your credentials in the request body or the URI?
I actually send them in the headers, which in here I'm not doing anything in this demo, but I would send a basic, I'd send an HTTP auth basic header, and then I would send my parameters.
Which is what the browsers are doing anyway.
Exactly. Yeah, if you ever go somewhere and they pop up that little ugly dialog, it's type in username and password. They're sending back an HTTP auth username and password combination. You could also do a digest, and those are signed certificates. But good luck with that. I mean, the average user doesn't know that they don't have to go to Google and then type in your website address and then click on it. You're not going to get them to install any sort of software that do signed certificates, all that kind of stuff. It's not going to happen.
A little different. Okay, put.
Yes.
We're going to change just one parameter on an existing object. Do I need to get? Oh, it depends on how the API is written. Is it typical or common that I need to get the entire set and send back the entire set with only the one item change?
Yes.
Okay.
The norm seems to be that a put is supposed to be the whole representation.
Okay.
And again, if you're just changing one piece or all the pieces, put needs to be the whole. So there's a patch. And patch is interesting.
Which is not listed here.
No, correct. I'm not even implementing patch in my API. Because remember, REST is a specification, not a standard. If I don't want to implement patch, we're not going to read about it in the documentation. Because I'm not supporting it. Patch, the concept of patch is, I have this long representation of a resource, and it's got 29 properties, but I only want to update a few of them. I'm going to patch pieces of it instead of putting all of it to save me time, bandwidth, understanding, etc. But Patch, and I'm trying to remember, it's been a while since I've read about Patch. Patch has a few interesting corners because you still have to go and get the data. You still have to have a way to. It just has some implementation details, and you can read about it in the cookbook. I can bring it up. The REST Web Service Cookbook has some good stuff in there about Patch. But it also has some interesting things too. I mean, let's. You see why this is a conversation? We're kind of just bouncing around. So you'll see here. Let me pull this one up, and let me create another tab. That's not it. We're going to talk about this in a moment, so you can see it, but pretend it's not really there. Okay, so these are my countries, right? Country ID, blah 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 blah. There we go. Okay, great. And here's my countries over here in JSON. Same resource, two different ways. If you read the cookbook and any other REST book, when they talk about representing resources, when they talk about representing a collection using XML, they all direct you to using the Atom Publishing Feed specification. Because somebody else has already written, we don't take up space in our book, and we can move on and everybody's happy. The Atom Feed specification is geared more towards the concept of articles and authors, some keywords, titles, that type of thing. It doesn't lend itself well to this. So, you read the cookbook, and it talks about, hey, this is what you should do. How do I have a self-reference relation when I'm doing my representation? And it says, oh, pull an atom, give it this name, there's an actual tag. You're like, oh, that's awesome. So I wrote it, fantastic, now we're rolling. Great, now I want to do this in JSON. You turn to the page in the cookbook, and it goes, you can also turn stuff back, you return stuff in JSON, and then it moves on. And you go, huh, well, this can't be that hard. Oh, but wait. The Atom Feed specification is only for XML. They don't have a implementation for JSON. Well, I want to be able to support a consuming application to be able to get the data out of my API any way they want. You'd be surprised, or maybe not, as I was researching a bunch of REST APIs, a lot of times the format in which I made my request was the format in which I got my response. I couldn't send a request in XML but get it in JSON or vice versa. It was what you started with is what you got. Now, that happened for one of two reasons. Programmer was lazy, programmer didn't know any better, and there's probably a third, which was management, you got what you got. As a developer, consuming the API, I was immediately frustrated. Because if I'm going to consume your API as part of my business process, I might have legacy data coming out of an enterprise system that's an XML that I'm going to send, but my newfangled consuming application, I want that data back in JSON because I'm going to do something with it. I'm trying to change the way the company does their work. Don't stick me with XML. So my API is built, and I advocate this as one of the points later, is allow your user to be able to ask for the format coming back to be different than what they requested. So I want these representations between my JSON and my XML representation, I want them to be identical in structure. Whatever client or code you use to consume it and parse your JSON and your XML, you should be able to end up with an object of country objects. And they should have the exact same format with the exact same parameters with the exact same data. I shouldn't have to say, well, if I'm in XML, my self-referencing links look like this because they follow the Atom Pub. But if I'm in JSON, I've got over here. I've immediately done everybody on both sides of the equation a humongous disservice. So, you'll notice I don't use Atom published specification in here. I tossed it because it only works in XML and not JSON. So instead, I came up with the concept of a resource link. And in my documentation, I tell you, if you see a resource link in this format, then this is what it means and how you should react to it. And the reason I did that, like this, is because all of these are dynamically being generated, and I'll show you the code later. When I ask for a country, I'm going to my objects, and I'm asking for a country object off of my country service, and I'm encoding it as JSON or XML, and it's automatically taking all the name and the value parameters and sending them back. I don't have to write any code that says, well, if I ask for a country, go to the database and get me an ID, and then add it here, and then do this. And I don't have to build anything. 100% dynamic. So I needed something that would tell the consumers, hey, this means something that I didn't think I was ever reasonably going to run into. as a property on one of my objects. The day I need resource link is the day it's going to be called something else on my object, or I'm going to have to rethink this and come up with something catchier. But so far, resource underscore link seems to be a good parameter value that I can intermix with the rest of the dynamically generated parameter values so they sit side by side. And my user can look here, or they can look here and get the exact same concept communicated to them as I intended. Okay. I know this is a lot of everything all over the place, but REST is a very interesting beast. Okay, so let me see here. I think that's it for that part of the example. Then we'll go into code here in a little bit. So that was the live examples. So there's some other ways you can interact with the REST service as well. There's an options header, or I say header, but well, yeah, header, that works. Options. So this will discover which methods of manipulation are available for the specified resource. So if I have countries as a collection, what can I do to it? Can I get it? Can I put it, delete it, move it, patch it, trace it, delete it? And what can I do? If I send it in options, your API should send back a list of valid actions you can perform on that resource. These options can be different for each resource. Maybe I can delete countries, or excuse me, a country resource, but I cannot delete this. Maybe based on my authentication and the level of access I have as a user, I have different options. All of that is valid. We haven't talked about how your access control fits into this. But there's no reason why an admin user has more options than somebody else. And so then if they try to send a header or try to spoof your system or anything like that, it should stop them because you're doing an access control layer in your code base. And we're going to look at both of these real quick. A head will show you a sample of a response header without any data. So you can send a head request and say, show me what you would respond with, but don't give me any actual data. I just want to see the headers because I want to check something or I want to whatever. I mean, again, it's not up to you to decide how they're going to consume it. So if I come back here and I'm on my, we'll just say country 2. Again, that doesn't matter. I can even take the 2 off because again, we're talking about the top level resource as a concept, not the individual one. And I say I want to see options, and I send. I can do a get, put, post, delete, options, and head. And yes, you include yourself in it. Otherwise, I shouldn't have been able to do a head, and I would have gotten a 504, not a whatever that other screen was. Sorry. It wouldn't be 404, because that's not found. You'd have the
501 not implemented.
There we go. 501 not implemented. Or you might get the 503 not authorized, depending on how you want your application. Do you want them to know that they're disallowed, or do you just want it to be, hey, you're just not allowed here at all? That's based up to your individual use. Again, it's a specification, not a standard. Either one of those is valid. Just be consistent and document it. All right, and let's do countries. See if it's any different. I can't remember honestly off the top of my head. Yes, it is. So I can get options and head countries. Because I can't create a new countries collection. I can read it all I want, but it's the individual country resources that I can create a new one, delete them, put them, that kind of thing. And then if I ask for a head, you're going to see that I get back all of this. So if I do a get, I get my response body back. If I do a head, I get no response body. But my headers are going to be identical. Because again, a head says, send me back the response without the response body to show me what a successful, what a response would be at this resource. I'm sorry?
When would you use it?
So I personally don't have a use for it at the moment, but the best I've been able to figure is if you are, as a consuming application, and you're kind of feeling out the edges of an API in like a self-directed type of mode, you want to get a feel as, is there something there? What can I expect back as a response? Do I have a content location or a 301 or 303C other so I know how to respond? I mean, maybe you want to do a little bit of feeling the service out before you actually make your request. I personally haven't used it yet, but I'm on the other side of this equation. I'm writing the API, I'm not necessarily consuming it.
I think the use case that we was talking about earlier, how do you know if something was there to be deleted or not?
Yeah, there'd be another way, yeah. Well, that actually wouldn't tell you.
If you do a get on something that's
Well,
there,
you know what?
should get a-
That's an excellent point. Let's try it. Let's do a head on a country that we know does not exist. because the head, the way I implemented it, the head works on the country resource, not the individual resource. By no means am I like the final, yes, it's right, yes, it's wrong person. I guess it would come down to your business need. The reason I implemented it here is because it's a country as a resource. Does that resource exist for me to do stuff with? I wasn't looking at the specific representation of a country. But if you had that need in your application, you certainly could say, if they specified a specific resource identifier, perform the head against that specific resource and not the resource as a concept. I guess it would be okay.
Because the head doesn't have anything to do with the get necessarily.
Correct. Correct. But you could make it that way. It feels a little wrong, but I think it'd probably be okay. You can certainly do worse things when you're implementing your REST API. So if you want to pick one thing that kind of makes you feel like a rebel, I do that. No one will probably even run into it, so no harm, no foul.
In your response body on the JSON,
Yes.
You don't have your brackets in there. Is that because you're not declaring it as an array object?
Let's see. So get. I have my, so that'll look just like this. Let me do country 1. So for which part?
Aren't you supposed to have not the, what are the brackets? Isn't that the
Instead of returning an object, return an array. It's-
Oh, when I'm doing countries.
No, it's just how you want to return your data.
I am here. Where's my mouse?
No, you're talking about the
No,
initial,
you're
like
returning.
the outside.
The top level.
Well, as an individual country, like again, if I'm doing just this, and so my thinking here, and it's probably clouded by some beers, is that if I was going to build a JSON object that's right inside the same, let's say I'm just doing pure JavaScript, and I'm in my browser, and I'm going to create a JavaScript object, I would do it like this, and that's my country object. I mean, that is how I would make it.
He's talking about the root level object.
Oh, well,
No,
I guess
not
you
that.
could do it that way, but they're not
The next one up,
right here.
that one. Like Facebook will kick back an array.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
Well, depending on what you're requesting.
Um,
If you request a feed, a news
Yeah,
feed,
whoops,
and
whoops,
it's an
whoops,
array,
something like
it'll send back an array instead of an object.
I got you. Well, in this case, I'm sending back a JSON object specifically. Yeah, I guess it depends how you want to implement it. Again, I don't think there's necessarily right or wrong. As long as you document it and don't change it on people, you'll be good. I mean, because I can also say a JSON P, and I can preface a JavaScript function name in front of it, and then wrap that whole response in parentheses. I hadn't really thought about that. I just, yeah.
Don't you need braces or like an object representation to name things? Or is that not true? Like here you've named response as...
I think if you go to the
Right, correct. Yeah, so I have this
website-
basically as a top-level object. It's think of it like PHP, we say new standard class. That's kind of the concept here. It's like, here's a general object, and then I've got a response property that is an object. I have a resource link property that's an object. I've got a country resource
Can
link.
you name things inside of an array? Like here you have inside of the top level I have
Right.
all the response.
I suppose.
You still have to have that
I don't
object.
know JSON
Well-
on that.
You still have to have that object.
Yeah.
Because this matches your XML representation. Except there's a tag on the top, all the
Right.
tags inside.
Which is how I got at it, because underneath I'm doing, I'm talking to my entity service, which is talking to my doctrine code underneath. It's handing me back a result set, and then I'm either encoding it as JSON. I mean, this is the result of taking a result object out of doctrine and saying JSON encode. Now, I'm not saying that it shouldn't perhaps be changed. I hadn't even really considered that.
Well, I think you get away with it a lot inside the browser because in JavaScript you're reading it into a
Right.
variable.
And
So you got var test or whatever, so it's
chances are
test
server to server is not going
response.
to be asking for JSON, and if they are, they're going to have a JSON decode, which is going to know how to handle this. So, could it be being better? I do agree. Yes.
I've ran into issues on the correct format as far as
Yeah. But it'd be easy. Well, I say it'd be easy enough to change. We'll see the code later. I don't know how you could get JSON encode to. You might have to take a JSON encode and then just like do a string, replace your braces on either end.
You
Or,
declared an array after you, whatever you're encoding.
yeah, I could distill it as an array. I have that built into the code. We'll try that. We can change it real easily. Because they're view scripts, they're really easy to tell them what to do.
You're just doing a PHP JSON and code?
Correct.